The manager's voice carried across the lobby like a bell struck once and held. "Mrs. Calloway, what an honor. We've been hoping you'd visit." He extended his hand with the kind of deference reserved for people who sign documents, not people who water other people's plants. Around the marble atrium, guests in evening wear turned to look. Some smiled without knowing why. A few tilted their champagne flutes in my direction, a reflex of courtesy toward whoever commanded that kind of greeting. And there, near the far end of the room, beside a floral arrangement taller than she was, my daughter-in-law Vivian turned. Her face did something complicated. It started as a smile, the same one she used when she wanted something, and then it fell apart, layer by layer, like a paper crane left in the rain. I had not been invited to this gala. I had been asked to stay home and watch the dog. But here I was, standing in the entrance of the Aldridge, the most storied boutique hotel in downtown Savannah, and apparently, according to Thomas Hargrove, the man who had called me 3 weeks ago on a Tuesday morning, it belonged to me. I smoothed the front of my navy dress and accepted the manager's hand. "Thank you," I said. "I should have come sooner." The call from my son had come on a Wednesday, the kind of gray October afternoon where the light gives up early. I was grading nothing. I hadn't been a school principal in 4 years, but old habits make you sit at desks. I had been reading, actually, a novel I'd started twice and abandoned. When Daniel's name lit up the screen, I put the book face down like I always did, like the call deserved my full attention. It always had. "Mom." His voice had warmth in it that I hadn't heard in a while. Not cold exactly, just rationed. "We have something exciting to tell you." I leaned back in my chair. My chest did that small, hopeful thing it did whenever Daniel sounded like himself again, like the boy who used to call me from college just to describe what he'd had for dinner, who once drove 6 hours through a snowstorm to sit with me after Robert died. Before Vivian's world became his whole horizon. "Vivian's Foundation is hosting its annual gala," he said, "at the Aldridge. It's a big deal this year. They're honoring some major donors. There's a silent auction, a dinner, the whole thing." "That sounds wonderful," I said, and I meant it. "We want you to come." My throat tightened. I set the novel on the desk beside me. "Really? Of course." "Your family." He laughed a little. "Vivian thought it would be nice for you to see what she's built. The foundation's done incredible work. We just want to share it with you." I remember thinking, this is it. The thaw I'd been waiting for. The gentle proof that I hadn't imagined the distance, and that they had noticed it too, and chosen, finally, to close it. "I'd love to come," I said. I hung up and stood at my window for a long time, looking out at the magnolia in my backyard, its last leaves holding on. I called my friend Carol that same evening. We'd been close since our children were in elementary school together, the kind of friendship that doesn't require explanation. I talked too fast, the way I always did when I was happy and embarrassed about being happy. "They invited me to Vivian's gala," I said, "at the Aldridge." There was a pause. "That's lovely, Margaret." Daniel sounded like himself. Really like himself. "Good," Carol said, carefully. "Then, how are you feeling about it?" "Not just excited. Actually feeling. Hopeful," I said. "Is that too much?" She didn't answer right away. "Just go in with open hands." "Not open arms. Open hands." I didn't fully understand what she meant. I thought I did. The following week, I drove to the little boutique on Whitaker Street, where I'd always found the right thing when the right thing mattered. I bought a navy dress with a wrap front and small pearl buttons at the cuff. It was elegant, without trying too hard. It was the kind of dress that said, "I belong here," without saying it out loud. I got my hair set on Friday. I told my stylist I had an event, and she asked what kind, and I said, "My son's," which was true enough. The night before the gala, I barely slept. I lay in the dark, in Robert's side of the bed. I had never fully claimed the center, Even after 8 years, and I thought about what it might feel like to stand beside Daniel in a room full of people and have him introduce me simply as his mother. Not as an obligation, not as a footnote, just as his. The morning of the event, Vivian called. I was still in my robe, coffee in hand. I assumed it was logistics. A time to arrive, where to park, whether to bring a gift for the foundation. Margaret! Her voice was pleasant the way a waiting room is pleasant, functional, designed to not alarm. I'm so glad I caught you. Good morning, I said. I was just thinking about tonight. That's actually why I'm calling. A small pause, the kind that has furniture in it. There's been a change. With the seating, the gala has grown this year. We have several major donors attending whose tables needed to be restructured, and we've had to consolidate the family seating significantly. My coffee mug was warm against my palm. I held it tighter. What does that mean? I asked, though some part of me already knew. We just don't have a seat for you tonight, unfortunately. It's purely logistical. You understand how these things go. I didn't say anything. But, she continued, brightening, we do have a small favor to ask. You know Biscuit has been having such separation anxiety lately. We hate leaving him alone, especially at night when there's all the noise from the street. Would you mind staying over at our place and keeping him company? I left a key under the mat. There's food for him in the pantry, top shelf. We'd just feel so much better knowing someone was there. She said a few more things. I don't remember them. I heard the call end. I set my phone on the counter. Outside my kitchen window, a pair of mockingbirds were arguing in the oak tree. I watched them for a while. Then I poured the rest of my coffee down the drain. The navy dress hung on the back of my closet door. I had pressed it the night before, smoothed every seam. Now I looked at it from across the room, and it looked back at me with the particular sorrow of an unworn thing. I sat on the edge of my bed. I thought about calling Daniel. I thought about what I would say, and then I thought about what he would say, probably something measured, something that validated Vivian's version of events without quite endorsing it, and I decided I couldn't hold that conversation without losing something I needed to keep. Instead, I picked up my phone and opened the email from Thomas Hargrove. I had received it 11 days earlier and had not responded. It sat in my inbox with the subject line, Estate of Robert Calloway, outstanding matter. I had assumed it was a formality, something clerical that had missed the window after Robert's death. Lawyers sent those things for years afterward, tying off loose ends, asking for signatures. But I read it properly now, for the first time. Thomas Hargrove introduced himself as the executor of a secondary trust established by my husband in the final year of his life. He was careful and precise in his language. He wrote that the matter had been held pending a specific date, our wedding anniversary, at Robert's explicit instruction. That date had passed 2 weeks ago. He was now reaching out to inform me that the primary asset of the trust, the Aldridge Hotel, had transferred fully and irrevocably into my name. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time. Then I sat very still. I had known Robert owned property. He had been a quiet investor, the kind of man who bought things and held them and never made a fuss about it. The Aldridge had been in his family for decades. His grandfather had built it, his father had renovated it, and Robert had, I thought, eventually sold it. We never discussed it much. He had handled it the way he handled many things, with a calm competence that didn't require my input. I pulled up the email again and dialed the number at the bottom. Thomas Hargrove answered on the second ring. He had a voice like old wood, solid and unhurried. Mrs. Calloway, he said. I'm glad you called. I was beginning to worry my email had gone to your spam. I'm sorry, I said. I should have called sooner. Not at all. Robert was specific. He wanted the timing to be right. A pause. He also wanted me to give you something verbally. His words, not mine. He said, she'll want to know why I didn't tell her. Tell her I knew she'd have given it away if I had. My eyes stung. I pressed my fingers against them. That was Robert exactly. He had known me better than I had known myself. I had spent 40 years giving things away: time, energy, patience, space. He had known that if he'd shown me an asset, I would have directed it immediately toward whoever needed it most, toward Daniel's education, toward the house, toward whatever gap needed filling. He had protected it for me instead. For later, for now, what would you like to do? Thomas asked. I looked at the navy dress on the closet door. I'd like to meet with you, I said. Today, if possible. Thomas Hargrove had an office on Bull Street, the kind of space that smelled of leather and unrushed time. He walked me through everything with patient thoroughness. The Aldridge had been operated by a management company throughout the years since Robert's death, turning a quiet profit, maintained to its original standard. Thomas had been the quiet custodian of Robert's intention, waiting for the date he'd been given. Your husband was meticulous, Thomas said, sliding a folder across the desk. My name was printed across the front. Margaret Louise Calloway, not a name used for plant watering. Inside were ownership documents, financial summaries, and a short handwritten note from Robert, just 2 lines. You were always the one who made things last. Now let something last for you. I held the paper for a long time. Thomas didn't rush me. The Aldridge is hosting a gala tonight, I said eventually. My daughter-in-law's charitable foundation. Thomas looked at me carefully. Yes, a rental agreement. Standard terms. In good standing. I'd like to attend, I said. Of course, it's your building. I'd like the front desk to know I'm coming. I thought for a moment. Not a fuss, just a greeting. Whatever they would normally do for the owner. Thomas nodded slowly. The corner of his mouth lifted. I'll call James, the general manager, this afternoon. I drove home and changed into the navy dress. Carol arrived at 7, dressed in burgundy, her silver earrings catching the light as she climbed out of her car. You called me 40 minutes ago and told me to get dressed, she said, looking at me on the front steps. You look. She stopped. Margaret. What happened? I'll tell you on the way, I said. We're going to the Aldridge. I told her in the car, and she was quiet for most of it, which was unusual. When I finished, she turned to look at me at a red light. Robert kept it for you, she said. He kept it for me. She shook her head. That man. There were tears in her voice, but she waved them away. All right. Let's go. The entrance to the Aldridge was lit the way it always was for formal events. Lanterns down the front steps, a subtle warmth pouring through the glass doors. A small line of guests moved through the entrance in their evening wear, checking names at the door. We joined the line without hurrying. Carol's hand was at my elbow, and then James, the general manager, appeared at the entrance. He had a calm and practiced authority about him, the composure of someone who ran a historic building every day and considered it a privilege. When he saw me, he came forward without hesitation. Mrs. Calloway, his voice carried just enough. What an honor. We've been hoping you'd visit. He extended his hand. The line of guests shifted, eyes turning with the polite curiosity of people at events who are always watching for whoever might matter. I shook his hand. Thank you, James. I should have come sooner. Not at all. Please, allow me. He gestured us inside with a quiet elegance, past the check-in table, past the murmur of the crowd, into the golden light of the atrium. And there, across the room, Vivian turned. I watched her face the way you watch a wave break the shape of it clear for only a second before the water pulls back and rearranges itself. Surprise, then confusion, then the rapid calculation of someone reordering information. She looked at James. She looked at me. She looked at the guests who had looked. Daniel was beside her. He turned when she did. And when his eyes found me, he went very still. I didn't wave. I didn't cross the room. James guided us toward a table near the windows overlooking the garden, and a server appeared with 2 glasses of sparkling water and offered champagne. And the evening moved forward the way evenings do, with music and light and the low current of conversation. Carol leaned close to me. "She's talking to Daniel," she murmured. "I know," I said. "He's looking over here." "I know that too." I let them look. I sipped my champagne and I watched the room my husband had held onto for me. And I noticed the ceiling pressed tin, original, painted ivory, and the sconces that Robert's grandfather had likely chosen, and the floors that had carried decades of footsteps, and I felt something settle in my chest that had been loose for a long time. Daniel came over near the end of the cocktail hour. He moved carefully, the way he had as a teenager when he'd done something he knew about before I did. "Mom," he said. He sat in the empty chair beside me. Carol quietly excused herself. "Hi, sweetheart," I said. He looked around the room, then back at me. "James called you the owner." "Yes." "Of the Aldridge." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "Dad's hotel." "It was his family's." "Yes." He left it to me. I turned to look at my son. His face was doing what it used to do when he was young and working through something he wasn't sure how to say. That face hadn't changed. It made my chest ache. "I only found out recently." "Why didn't you?" He stopped. Started again. "Why didn't he tell us?" "I think he knew what would have happened to it if he had," I said simply. "It would have become something else. Something useful to someone. He wanted it to be mine." Daniel was quiet for a long time. The band had begun to play something gentle in the next room. Through the glass doors, I could see Vivian moving among the guests with her practiced ease, laughing at the right moments, touching shoulders, doing what she did well. "Vivian called you this morning," Daniel said. It wasn't a question. "She did." He put both hands on the table. They were Robert's hands, the same shape. I had always loved that about him. I didn't know she was going to do that. "I want you to know that." I looked at him. "I believe you, Daniel, but I should have." He stopped himself. "I've been letting things happen that I shouldn't have let happen. For a while now." "I know that." I didn't fill the silence for him. He needed to find it himself. "I don't know how we got here," he said quietly. "I think it was gradual," I said. "These things usually are. No single moment, just a lot of small ones, where someone said something and no one said otherwise." He nodded slowly. His eyes were wet in a way he was working to control. "I love you," I said. "That's not in question. But love doesn't mean I'll arrange myself to disappear on request." I should have said that a long time ago. "You shouldn't have had to," he said. "No," I agreed. "I shouldn't have." We sat together for another few minutes, saying less than the silence held. Then Daniel straightened, wiped his face with the back of his hand, and said he needed to get back. He stood, paused, and put his hand briefly on my shoulder. I covered it with mine. Then he walked back across the room toward his wife, and I watched him go. Carol reappeared with a small plate of appetizers and set them between us without comment. We ate and talked about ordinary things for a while, her daughter's new job, the garden I'd been neglecting, a book we'd both read and disagreed about. The gala moved around us in its usual rhythm. Nobody disturbed us. James stopped by once to ask if everything was to my satisfaction, and I told him it was, and I meant it. We left before the auction ended. The night air was cool and carried the last suggestion of jasmine from the hotel's front garden. Carol looped her arm through mine as we walked to the car. "So what now?" she asked. I had been thinking about that since leaving Thomas Hargrove's office, not in the urgent, pressured way of someone trying to make a decision, but in the quiet, opening way of someone who has just discovered they have more room than they thought. "I want to sit with it for a while," I said. "I've spent so long accommodating other people's timetables." Carol nodded. "Good answer. And I think I want to travel." The thought had been forming since the afternoon. There's that inn in the Berkshires we always said we'd get to. And I've never been to Portugal. Carol looked at me sideways. "Are you asking me to come?" "I am." She was quiet for a moment, then, "Give me a week to reschedule my dentist." We drove back through the streets of Savannah. past the squares and the oaks draped with their long patience. And the city felt different to me than it had that morning. Not the city itself. The city was the same, but I was not standing in it the same way I had been. My phone buzzed in my purse. I glanced at the screen. Vivian. I let it ring. The text from Daniel came the next morning, before 8. I was sitting on my back porch with coffee, watching a fat squirrel dismantle my bird feeder with the focused energy of a professional. I've been thinking all night. I'm sorry, Mom. Not just for last night. For all of it. I don't expect you to just move on. I just needed to say it. I read it twice, then set my phone face up on the arm of my chair and looked at the squirrel. Forgiveness, I thought, was not the same as returning to a previous version of something. You couldn't restore a thing by just agreeing to pretend it hadn't changed. What you could do was decide what you wanted the next version to look like and build it honestly from whatever remained that was worth keeping. Daniel was worth keeping. That was clear to me. I typed back, I know, sweetheart. I love you. Let's have dinner when things settle. Just us. He replied with 2 words, I'd like that. A month later, Carol and I were sitting on a terrace in the Douro Valley, watching the light move across the vineyard below like it was performing something deliberate. We had spent the morning walking a village that predated the United States by several centuries, and the afternoon at a small quinta, where a woman our age poured us wine and told us she had replanted the entire estate after her husband passed, and everyone told her she was too old to bother. What did you tell them? Carol had asked. The woman smiled. I poured them wine and didn't answer. The vines answered for me. Now, in the long gold of late afternoon, Carol lifted her glass. To Robert, she said. To Robert, I said. And to boxes opened late. We drank. Below us, a train moved slowly through the valley, following the curve of the river. I watched it until it disappeared, and then I kept watching the place where it had been, the emptiness after a thing that felt, somehow, like abundance. I thought about the women I had known in my life who had folded themselves smaller to fit the available space, who had ironed the tablecloths for gatherings they were not invited to sit at, who had filled their days with the specific labor of being useful and had confused that with being valued. I had been one of those women. I wasn't sure precisely when I had stopped, but I thought it might have been on the morning I opened Thomas Hargrove's email and let myself read it. Or perhaps it was earlier than that. Perhaps it was the moment I tore Vivian's seating chart from my expectation and decided I would go anyway. On the terrace, a small cat appeared from nowhere and wound around the legs of my chair. I reached down and scratched behind its ears, and it pressed its head against my hand with the uncomplicated trust of something that knows what it wants and asks for it without apology. I had been thinking, in the weeks since Savannah, about what to do with the Aldridge. Thomas had been patient and methodical, outlining options, projections, possibilities. I could maintain the management arrangement indefinitely. I could be more active. I could endow something through it. That last thought had stayed with me. I had been a school principal for 22 years. In that time, I had watched hundreds of women teachers, administrators, aides, pour themselves into the work of shaping children and receive in return exactly what the system had budgeted for them, which was rarely enough. Many of them had retired into a kind of quiet that wasn't restful, a quiet that said, "You are no longer required." I thought about making the Aldridge something more than a hotel, a gathering place perhaps. A small foundation, not a charity, exactly, but a network, a way for women past 60 who had built things and been overlooked to find each other and consult and sit at tables where their knowledge was not treated as nostalgia. I hadn't named it yet, but the shape of it was clear. I would tell Thomas when I returned. The evening of our last night in Portugal, we had dinner at a long table in a farmhouse outside Lamego with 7 other people we had met over the course of the week. A retired judge from Atlanta, a painter from Edinburgh, a couple from Sao Paulo who had sold their company and were taking 2 years to move slowly through the world. a retired nurse from Oregon who was learning, at 67, to ride a motorcycle. We ate salt cod and roasted peppers and bread that tasted like it had been made by someone who considered bread a serious undertaking. We drank wine from the valley below. We talked about our children, some of us, and about the places we still wanted to go, and about the specific satisfaction of being exactly where you are without wanting to be anywhere else. At some point, the retired judge from Atlanta turned to me and said, "You seem like someone who recently made a decision. Is it that obvious?" I asked. "There's a particular calm," she said, "in people who have stopped waiting for permission." I thought about that. "I think I've been granting myself permissions my whole life," I said. "I just didn't always use them." She smiled and raised her glass, and the table went on talking. Voices layered over each other in several languages, and somewhere outside a dog was barking at the dark, and the candles burned low, and the night was warm, and I was exactly where I was. I have never been good at endings. As a principal, I always ran my graduation speeches 3 minutes long because there was too much to say, and the moments kept expanding. So I will say only this. I did not need the Aldridge to become someone worth reckoning with. The building was Robert's way of ensuring I had room to move, and I am grateful for it, but it was not the source of anything. What it gave me was not power or status. It gave me the occasion to step through a door I had been standing outside for years. I was not invisible because of what I lacked. I was invisible because I had agreed, in the slow and wordless way of a person who mistakes endurance for grace, to stop taking up space. I had a son who was learning, with the delayed and effortful honesty of a good man who had looked away too long, to see me properly again. We had dinners now. The kind where we talked until the restaurant turned the chairs upside down around us. Vivian and I existed in a careful, honest distance, not warmth, not hostility, but something truthful, which is more than we had before. I had Carol, who had seen me at my flattest and my fullest, and called me her friend without condition. I had a building where something useful was being planned. I had Portugal behind me, and the Berkshires ahead, and a woman in the Douro Valley who replanted an entire estate and let the vines do the talking. And I had Robert's 2 sentences, folded now in the inside pocket of my coat, worn soft at the creases. "You were always the one who made things last. Now let something last for you. I am 64 years old, and I am not waiting for anyone to announce that I may now proceed. I am already in motion."